Good morning. It's a tribute to all of you that I'm standing up here right now. I've been in some plays, I've been in some speech tournaments, and some readers' theater, but most of that is years ago. I tend to become very quiet, if not invisible, when in groups or crowds of any size whatsoever. Being invisible is something I learned early when I began to suspect I was gay, growing up with my Catholic military family on bases in Georgia, Florida, and Mississippi. On the surface, I was the very model of a young Catholic boy. I was baptized, confirmed, an altar boy, and I went to confession regularly. But even as a very young age, I was smart enough to know that being Catholic and gay was not a good thing. So I played my piano, read my books, got good grades, kept my head down low, and secretly read everything I could about the causes of homosexuality. I also did something that most Catholics do not seem to do. I read the Bible several times. The Bible is one scary book. God seems to have personality changes depending on what book of the Bible that you're reading. He seems to cut down on all the smiting of evildoers once Jesus comes into the picture, though. From a very young age, I questioned many things about Catholicism and the Bible. Why would people of other faiths or beliefs go to hell because they didn't believe in Jesus Christ? Why is God so mean in the Old Testament? Creation in 7 days, really? I never got an acceptable answer to most of these questions, but was given permission to stop going to confession if I continued to talk to God directly. It really helped that some of the parish priests were family friends who came to dinner quite often. I didn't really start to look around, though, for another faith community until college. I started attending services at Calvary Chapel in Riverside because I was spending my final year of college at California Baptist College, which is a long story I will not go into. By this time, I was really trying to pray the gay away. I don't want to leave you in suspense. It didn't work. I didn't last long at Calvary because it was not good for my self-esteem to be told week after week after week that what I was evil. But I did stay there far too long looking back. Then I did the Course in Miracles, which I actually enjoyed quite a bit, attended a non-denominational, that's not easy to say, church in Long Beach, where they had the radical belief that the stories in the Bible were not to be taken literally, which was new information for me to grasp. The Catholic Church does a great job of brainwashing you. That was the beginning of my journey towards a more open, enlightened view of my spiritual life, instead of focusing on sin, hell, and eternal damnation. Again, though, the Catholic Church really had done a number on me. I couldn't dare to believe that there was another way, another spiritual path for me without ending up in hell with all those people that believed in the wrong God. When I moved in with my husband, Tim, in Mission Viejo, after living alone for many years in Long Beach, we attended a little gay church in Laguna Beach called Christ Chapel. It was great to worship with other gay and lesbian people for a change and not worry that we were not worthy. But it was the same old sermons for me that I've been hearing for years. We eventually left and started going to Catholic Mass again because Tim's mom, Vicki, went there regularly and we usually had brunch with her. But when she went to Alaska for several months, we discovered Tapestry. The concept of a church that was also open to agnostics and atheists was a difficult concept even for an ex-Catholic to take in. Over time, though, as I allowed my mind to open and let go of some of the confining beliefs that I couldn't seem to let go of, I noticed something very important about the members of Tapestry. Most of the Christians I have known are really big on sprouting religious dogma. but not great examples for following through on social action or living up to the principles that they're usually sprouting quite loudly. The Tapestry members we have been privileged to know live their principles. When Tim's mom died a few years ago, we were able to come to Tapestry more regularly and slowly get to know people here and get more involved and feel like we belonged. The principle of inherent dignity and worth of every single person is a concept I would much rather live by than being told that I was born in sin and only worth anything if I was saved. And it's such a relief to have our homosexuality and marriage be such a non-issue. I'd like to give a shout out to Bart Bean, who was the first person to reach out to us when we first started attending. He and Ellen are two of the nicest, most loving people I've ever been privileged to know. And thank you for letting me share just a small part of my spiritual journey with you.
Howdy. Our story. When Nikki and I first met at Wheaton College, it was 1978. We were both steeped in the values, beliefs, and traditions of the evangelical Christian church. I was raised and schooled in this tradition and even took off to the jungles of northern Peru as a summer missionary. And Nikki turned to it in her 20s during a time of personal crisis in her life, then going on to add a Multnomah School of the Bible graduate certificate in biblical studies on top of her UCLA philosophy degree. We were both strong followers of a radical Jesus, a Jesus who cared for the poor, the sick, the downtrodden. We believed in a social justice Jesus.
However, Wheaton College had plenty of rules and norms to follow if one was to prove their allegiance to Christ. No smoking, no dancing, no drinking, no card playing, unless it was Uno, and no extramarital sex. Even movies were suspect, and God forbid anyone should engage in a homosexual relationship. So for 4 years, we struggled together and against one another about what was obviously a growing attraction to one another. When we finally gave in to our evident and growing love, Barb was working at Wheaton as the director of their Career Development Center, and I was starting my own business as a freelance training and development and documentation writer, having both finished our master's degrees at Wheaton. A pastor I was close to at the time had told me clearly that God loved me regardless. But we knew that regardless didn't apply at Wheaton College, so Barb left her job at the college and moved into leadership development at what was then First Chicago Bank, later Chase. And we left Wheaton and moved to Oak Park, home of Frank Lloyd Wright and Ernest Hemingway, a much more diverse and liberal suburb. Our faith in our social justice Jesus was still strong and important to us, and we continued working hard for the church, LaSalle Street Church in Chicago. Now, LaSalle was well known for its commitment to a variety of inner city ministries: a legal aid clinic, a tutoring program, a counseling center for people without financial resources, a program for unwed mothers, and a senior center for the residents of nearby Cabrini Green. There was even a book written about LaSalle and the work called The Church That Takes on Trouble. Nikki and I were heavily involved in this program, both of us on the board and involved in visitation, food preparation, providing transportation, and just doing what needed to be done. Eventually, Nikki was asked to join the senior center staff as assistant director, and I joined the church board. All this time, though, we were living in the aptly named closet, staying hidden.
not being able to let people know the truth about our relationship. In our apartment, and even later in our house, we kept a separate bedroom set up as a front for friends and family. There were a few select friends with whom we were honest and out, but not many. This went on for about 10 years. It was not easy.
And then sometime in the early 90s, one of our good friends at LaSalle, Gary, a pillar of the social justice work of the church, surprised everyone by announcing he was gay. The furor and uproar and backlash against Gary was instantaneous and surprising. Apparently, the church that takes on trouble had some troubles it did not want to take on. And Barb and I quickly came to realize that it was dishonest and cowardly to let Gary stand there and take all the heat by himself.
And so we too came clean and told the truth about our relationship. And then the doo-doo hit the fan. What followed was several very painful months of discussions, most of which took the form of pointing out how the Bible condemned us. We were still strong in our belief that Jesus loved us. I remember about this time, Nikki was marching in the Chicago Pride Parade, playing her trumpet with the Lakeside Pride Band. And when they reached Reverend Phelps and his band of hateful followers holding signs saying, "God hates fags," the band stopped, turned towards them, and played "Jesus Loves Me." We tried to counter the haters and the Bible thumpers by pointing out that Jesus never once mentioned homosexuality in the Bible, but he did command us not to judge 17 times, but it fell on deaf ears.
So we became more radicalized, joined a group called Christian Lesbians Out, also known as Clout, and read everything we could get our hands on by Christian lesbian scholars such as Virginia Mollenkott and Letha Scanzoni and many others. It was a fraught time. Emotions were high, we were hurt and bruised, and indeed, it was the only time in 44 years that Barb ever hit me. When she came home from a particularly upsetting board meeting and I unwisely started telling her all the things she should have said and didn't. And bam, she slugged me. That was a surprise. Those of you who know Barb well know this was and is completely out of character for her, but it provides an example of just how difficult this time was for us. At one board meeting, I was so irritated, I told them all to consider the fact that masturbation was a homosexual act. Dead silence.
We, along with a few other brave souls, tried valiantly, but in the end, LaSalle Street held a decisive vote, setting a policy that non-celibate homosexuals were welcome to come and sit in the pews, but not hold any leadership positions. So Nikki left the staff, I left the board, and then we left the church entirely as an act of protest. Not an easy choice, and not one we made lightly after all the love we had put into the place and its people.
But still, we were holding on to our faith, to our belief that it was important to do good work in this world, and that Jesus provided an example for us to follow in doing so. And so we cast about and found, of all places, a welcoming Mennonite congregation. In spite of our agreement that we weren't going to do this, Barb stood up in our first visit and announced that we were there as a lesbian couple. And surprisingly to me, they put their figurative arms around us and welcomed us. We remember vividly the day they held a ceremony encircling all the gay members and singing, "How could anyone ever tell you you were anything less than beautiful?" We'll be singing that today. It leaves us in tears, so don't be surprised. But even though that congregation was welcoming, as you might imagine, the Mennonite denomination was not. And eventually, after another fruitless series of discussions and battles, this loving congregation was kicked out of the Mennonite denomination, and they ultimately dissolved. And that's the point at which we said, screw it. Maybe God loved us regardless, but many of his people clearly didn't. And thus began our 20-year hiatus away from the church, away from the so-called Christians, away from the Bible, away from any expression or practice of faith.
But still, there was always the small voice within us that believed something. We're not really sure what. And it never really went away. And so, when we moved to California in 2013 and felt like we wanted to meet some good people and make some friends, we thought again of finding a welcoming church, thinking that we might be gluttons for punishment, but still willing to try. By then, things were much different in society and especially in California. We were able to get legally married, and we felt hopeful. And through a serendipitous series of events, we found our way to Tapestry. And we knew we had found our place, a place where we are loved and accepted, not just tolerated. A place where social justice is important and practiced. A place that nourishes us spiritually and expanded our faith horizons and our system of belief. Some of God's people may have driven us away in the past, but you brought us back home and kept us here. You have loved us regardless, and we love you back. It means more than we can say. Thank you.
Thank you.